Good morning. Welcome to Plattwoods Church. My name is Cassie O'Brien. I serve here as one of the associate pastors, and I am so glad that you have chosen to join and worship with us on this first Sunday of 2026. As we begin a new year together, I recognize that many of us are carrying different emotions into this space. Some of us arrive hopeful for what a new year can bring. Others are exhausted from living through 2025. Anyone else? Some of us are relieved to have made it here and to a new year, and others are still holding questions about things that have happened and what is going to happen next. A new year, though, often brings with it this temptation to look for clarity, to set clear goals, a clear path, a clear direction. We want to know where we are going and how to get there. This is usually the point in the year when we start doing a little mental math about our lives. Credit card statements from Christmas have just started to arrive in our inboxes. Anyone else get their Amazon credit card bill? Just me. And we think, okay, well, we need a plan. We look at the leftovers, the cookies, the candy, the pie, especially all of the baked goods that magically appeared around here in December. And after stepping on a scale, we think, yeah, I should probably move my body a little bit more than I did last month. And we think, well, maybe we had too many spiked eggnogs, and dry January should be in our futures. We want to start setting intentions and making goals, and if we're honest, considering resolutions that we're not entirely sure that we will keep. But underneath all of that, I think there is something deeper. We're not just trying to save money and lose weight and get organized, although those are all very good things, but we are trying to figure out where we're going and trying to get our bearings as we head into the next season. I think one of the most unsettling feelings that we can have is the feeling of being lost, unsure of where we are going or how to get there. And not just geographically, though that can be stressful enough, but getting lost other ways too, spiritually, vocationally, maybe in our relationships. We find ourselves asking things like, where is this heading? Am I going in the right direction? Am I really where I want to be in life? Did I miss a turn somewhere back there? For those of you who know me well, I am no stranger to getting lost, at least geographically. Even though there is a giant screen in the front of my SUV that I plug my phone into for my Apple Maps, I still miss turns and head down the wrong path all the time. Even when I've traveled the same road dozens of times, just ask my friends how many times I've been late because I've taken a wrong exit. It just happened a couple weeks ago. But in 2016, exactly 10 years ago, at the beginning of January, right now, I traveled to the Holy Land. And like many pilgrimages, it was something I had dreamed about for a long time. I had imagined sacred moment, ancient stones and ruins, prayerful silence, meaningful clarity, especially as a young pastor about to begin full-time ministry. I wanted to know, is this really the right path for my life? What I did not imagine happening was getting lost, which is exactly what happened. One evening, we were staying in Bethlehem at the Angel Hotel, ironically enough, and we had a relatively light day, but the several days preceding that had been pretty full schedules with lots and lots of walking. But I was frustrated that our day was ending early, because apparently a decade ago, I was much more eager to be constantly on the go. That's not so true anymore. But I decided I'm gonna go explore. So we explored the area around the hotel, and then one of my travel companions and I, we decided to go on a little adventure. We wanted to see this nativity scene that we'd passed by on our bus ride outside of a local church. We arrived at our destination just fine. It took about 15 or 20 minutes to walk there. But as we started back for the hotel, we began walking through this maze of narrow streets. It looked like that. There were stone walls on either side. There were winding paths that seemed to double back on themselves. Everything looked the same. At some point, I realized I no longer knew what direction I was going. I didn't know how far we were from our hotel, and if I'm honest, I did not know where the church was, where we had just been. There was this moment of anxiety, of wanting a map, a sign, some sort of voice to appear to say, turn left here, or go straight 200 feet. Instead, there was uncertainty and fear. There was two women alone after dark in a foreign country where we did not speak the language. I did not have an international phone plan, so there was no one I could call. And so I needed to rely on my own senses to find my way back. So we slowed down. We paid attention. We opened our eyes and we started to look for landmarks or familiar shops or tried to remember corners that we had passed by. We didn't go the same way that we came, but eventually, by staying alert, we found our way. Have you ever had a moment like that where you have just felt completely lost? Maybe it wasn't trying to get to a physical destination. Maybe you were met with unexpected news, or you had a job shift, or a relationship ended. Those kinds of moments are terrifying, and we want someone or something to tell us where to go next. Looking back, that night taught me something I didn't expect. I didn't realize it at the time, but I do have more clarity around it now. It's that a pilgrimage is rarely knowing exactly where you are going, but it's about keeping your eyes open enough to notice how God might be leading you in another way. Perhaps it's less about clarity and knowing the destination and more about knowing that God is right there with you, guiding your path. And that brings us to today, which is Epiphany Sunday. If you are wondering why we are still singing Christmas carols or why the sanctuary still looks like Christmas, it's because, well, it is still Christmas. It's the 11th day of Christmas, to be exact. Happy 11th day of Christmas, everyone. In the life of the church, Christmas doesn't end on December 25th. That's actually when it begins. Christmas lasts for 12 days, and on the 13th day, which is January 6th, Tuesday, we celebrate a day called Epiphany. An epiphany means manifestation or revelation. It's about something being made visible that was already present, but not yet fully seen. And on Epiphany, we remember the story of the Magi, the wise ones from the East, the last figures in our nativity set that we have not talked about yet. These guys who follow a star, encounter Jesus, and then go home by another way. The story comes from Matthew's gospel, and most of what we picture in our minds when we think of the Christmas story comes from Luke. We read it on Christmas Eve, the shepherds, the angels, the manger. But Matthew tells it a little bit different. There's no shepherds here. There's no multitude of heavenly hosts proclaiming that Jesus is born. Instead, Matthew gives us travelers, outsiders. They are seekers watching the night sky. Angels don't proclaim his birth, rather a star appears, and they decide to follow. To be honest, Matthew's version is probably my favorite of the nativity stories because it's full of drama and suspense. There is tension and there is politics and there is a sinister plot and all sorts of risk. Hear now these words from the gospel according to Matthew. This is the story of Epiphany. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east, and we have come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts, and he asked where Christ was to be born. And they said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are the least among the rulers of Judah. Because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." They are telling the story from the prophet Micah. Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found from them the time when the star had first appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go, search carefully for the child, and when you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." Does anyone think Herod is telling the truth here? No. When they heard the king, they went, and look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and they saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling on their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chest and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Because they had been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. The last verse is really what I want us to focus our intention on for today as we start the new year. But first, let's talk just for a minute about these key players in our story. We hear that Magi have come from the east, following a star that they have spotted in the night sky. I don't know about you, but I don't often see celestial anomalies and then decide to take a long trip and follow it to see what's happening. Does anyone? Okay, not alone. But we really don't know a whole lot about these strange visitors, except that Matthew calls them magi, or magos in Greek. From our nativity scenes and the hymns that we sing, we often presume that there are three men or kings, right? We sing, "We three kings." We'll sing that in a little bit. But the text doesn't tell us that. There is no mention of royalty or even gender, and we definitely don't get a head count. We often assume three because there's three gifts. But all we know is there are multiple magi, and what history tells us about magi is they are probably astronomers. They are ones who studied the stars, and so they would have paid attention to this particular star that appeared in the night sky. Scholars have spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what Matthew meant by the star. Some think maybe it was Halley's Comet, maybe it was a supernova, or most likely some kind of rare planetary alignment between Jupiter and Saturn. I guess back then, Jupiter was known as the kingly planet, and Saturn sometimes symbolized the Jewish people, so put together, it looked like the heavens themselves were pointing the Magi to the King of the Jews. We don't know for sure exactly what drew these wise men or Magi from the east, but it makes sense. People who spent their lives watching the night sky would notice something, and they would feel compelled to investigate. And if they were wealthy, as Matthew hints, the journey would have been difficult, but far from impossible. Up until this point, we've been talking about the Magi and what might have drawn them on their journey in the first place. They were people who were trained to notice what others might miss, watchers of the night sky, interpreters of signs, attentive to movement and change above them. They lived in a world without GPS, without road signs, without certainty of where the journey would lead. And yet they were willing to move because they trusted what they were seeing. And that kind of trust might feel strange to us. But most of human history, that's exactly how people learned to navigate the unknown. There is one particular star that has guided travelers for centuries. Anyone know what that star is? Polaris, or the North Star. It has been the most reliable guide. And unlike other stars, the North Star appears fixed in the sky. While everything else moves around it, it appears steady. And because of its position above the Earth's axis, it consistently marks true north. I don't know which way north is. I get lost a lot, y'all. But ancient sailors and desert travelers and explorers have used it not to tell them where they will end up, but to help them stay oriented as they moved. And that distinction matters. The North Star does not give directions like a map. It does not explain the terrain ahead. It does not promise safety or ease. It simply provides orientation. The Magi did not follow the star because it gave them certainty. They followed it because it gave them a direction to go. They didn't tell the Magi every step they would take. It didn't warn them about Herod and his plot. It didn't reveal the dangers waiting ahead. It simply kept them oriented toward God's movement in the world. And that orientation matters because when you're truly oriented toward God, you begin to notice that the world's directions sometimes don't line up with God's way. The Magi, they follow this star faithfully, and it leads them not first to a manger, but first to a palace, right? To a place of power, of fear, manipulation. What looked like the logical route turns out to be the dangerous one. And it's there in this moment that the Magi will have to decide, will they keep moving according to the expectations of those in power, or will they listen to God's voice calling them somewhere else? And so when they arrive, they start to ask questions. They're like, hey, we've heard that this king has been born. Where is he? It would make sense that they would think that a king has been born in a palace, right? But what they don't know yet is that Herod is dangerous. They don't know that he's exactly the wrong person to ask this question. And when Herod hears this, he is troubled. And when Herod is troubled, everyone should be worried. Herod was known for protecting his power at any cost. The idea of another king, even a baby, is a threat to him. And so Herod gathers his council and he's like, hey, y'all, why are these guys talking about a new king? I am the king, remember? So he comes up with a plan, and well, it's not exactly festive. His plan is baby murder. And it's not really that kind of celebrate the birth of a king plan that you might expect. And so he tries to use the wise ones in his assassination scheme to get them to tell Herod exactly where Jesus is located because he doesn't have the technology to track him, right? So Herod says, go and find the child and then come back and report where he is so I can honor him too. But the Magi, they don't get caught up in his plan. They arrive, they see the child, and they are overwhelmed with joy. And the very last verse that Matthew emphasizes is they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, and so they take a different road home. They change course. They go another way. Encountering the divine should do that to us. When you encounter God, you don't stay the same. You don't keep moving in the same direction. You adjust. You change course. You go another way. Octavia Butler, she writes this poem in one of her books. She says, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. The Magi encounter God not in a palace, not in power, but in a child. And that changes them. And because they are changed, their path changes too. They cannot go back the same way that they came because the world doesn't look the same to them anymore. And that's this moment that I want us to hold on to as we begin a new year, that they followed God's guidance, even if it meant taking a completely different direction, even if it meant going against those in power, even when the path wasn't what anyone expected. These Magi, they were wise and wealthy. They could have benefited greatly from some international cooperation with Herod, and they most certainly would have received diplomatic immunity for being accessories to murder if they had participated. But they chose to go another way because that's where God was leading them. I think that sometimes the simplest and most powerful thing that the Magi do in this story is also very quiet. It's that they take a different path home. They don't go and confront Herod. They don't expose his plan. They don't try to overthrow the empire, but they refuse to entertain wicked power and play along with it. And they take this courageous step to go another way. They don't do it because it's easier or because it's safer. They do it because their eyes are open now, because they have seen something that they cannot unsee. They have encountered God, not in power or spectacle, but in a manger. And once your eyes are opened to the way that God is moving in the world, you can no longer pretend that old roads are neutral. You can no longer unknow what you know. And with their eyes open, the Magi can see Herod's fear for what it is. They can see that cooperation with power would mean complicity in violence. And so without any fanfare or confrontation, they choose a different road. We often assume that faithfulness has to look loud or dramatic. We think that following God always requires this grand gesture or perfectly articulated plan. But sometimes the most faithful thing that we can do is choose a different road, especially when the familiar road offers things like comfort or status or this false sense of security. We often retreat to what's familiar. We return to old habits or patterns or relationships or systems that feel safe, even when we know they aren't life-giving. We go back to what we know, not because it's good for us, but because it's known. And yet, the Magi remind us that faithfulness often begins with the courage not to go back the same way. As we begin this new year, maybe the invitation isn't to start with a list of resolutions or perfectly formed goals. Maybe it's to start by opening our eyes to where God is leading us and a willingness to go another way. As we mark Epiphany today, we are invited not just to remember the journey of the Magi, but to begin our own. And one way that we'll do that is through the practice of star words, not Star Wars, star words. Up in these baskets, there are little cards with words on them. And during communion, you will be invited to receive a word for the upcoming year. Star words are not resolutions. They are not goals to accomplish. They are not something to master or fix. Instead, they are a way of paying attention. A simple invitation to notice how God might be present and active in your life over the coming year, and then to orient your life in that direction. I might secretly be hoping to draw rest. That would be a great way to orient my year. But just as the Magi followed the star that helped orient them towards Jesus, these star words offer us a way to stay oriented, not toward certainty or control, but toward awareness, toward curiosity, toward God's movement in places that we might otherwise overlook. Over the coming year, I would invite you to keep that word with you or put it somewhere visible and then return to it throughout the year. Notice how its meaning might shift in your life. Use it in your prayer time as a way to pause and to listen and see how God is guiding you. This practice reminds us that God speaks in different ways than we often expect, and that transformation happens quietly over time. You don't need to know where the road leads yet. You only need to stay open to the possibility that God is still guiding, still revealing, and still inviting you another way. Let's pray. Holy God, you met the Magi on the road and changed their direction. As we begin this new year, open our eyes to see where you are at work. Give us courage to listen for your voice, wisdom to resist harmful paths, and trust to follow when you lead us another way. Orient our lives toward your love, toward justice and peace, that we may walk forward changed by our encounter with you. We pray this in the light of Christ, who guides us still. Amen.